Hello, and welcome back to Bumblebee, where today's video is about the weird and nonsensical top 10 old historical laws that defy logic. Remember to bring your perspective. Not all things that are logical to us are logical to others, and the same goes for perceiving something as illogical, so let's get started. First off, don't get yourself into a fig jam. In 6th century Athens, it was illegal to export figs outside of city limits. The penalty for doing so? Death. This was actually the case with all Athenian food, with the exception made for olives. Apparently, this was torture for some fig-loving souls who broke the law by smuggling the not fruit out, who wanted to make some big cashola off of the reputably unparalleled Athenian figs. But unlike fig smuggling, blackmail was perfectly legal. So if someone busted you leaving town with your pocket full of figs, they'd threaten to tell the fuzz about it. These blackmailers were called sycophants, which translates to the revealer of figs. And you may know that word with a different spelling. Someone who sucks up to someone else to take advantage. A suck up. Yeah, that's where that comes from. Fergie may have butchered that anthem, but she could probably kill Big Boys Don't Cry. Ah, jokes. Yeah, so the Qin dynasty was known for its harshness, a lot of effed up punishments and mentalities in those days. If you were male and tall enough to be regarded as an adult, go check out my video, Top 10 Unusual Ancient Laws and Punishments, that'll freak you out if you want to learn more about that. You needed to be extra careful about your emotions. According to the 18 Laws of Qin, a set of legal codes written on bamboo slips unearthed in the Hubei province in 1975, Qin laws prohibited men from crying. If an adult man was found shedding tears without fair reason, his beard and eyebrows would be shaven off as punishment. The Qin dynasty is well known for its worship of martial spirit and warrior traditions, so crying as a man was seen as a sign of weakness. Unfortunately, society today continues to stomp men's emotions into the dirt and still tell them that it's weakness, which it never has been, nor will be. Next up is how you don't want beef. February 18th, 1872, a group of Japanese Buddhist monks break into the emperor's imperial palace demanding counsel, causing a frenzy in which more than half of them are killed by guards. The issue that the monks felt was so worthy of losing life for was considered an existential spiritual crisis for their country. A few weeks earlier, the emperor had eaten beef, effectively repealing a 1200-year-old ban on consuming animals. Japanese avoided eating meat for more than 12 centuries since Buddhism arrived in the 6th century. Buddhist teachings dictate that humans are reincarnated into other living beings, including animals. So, as a meat eater, you run the risk of eating your reincarnated ancestors. In 675 AD, Emperor Tenmu issued the first official decree banning the consumption of beef, horse, dog, chicken, and monkey during the height of farming season from April to September. As time went on, the practice would be solidified into a year-round permanent no-meat-eaten ban. When the Portuguese missionaries arrived in Japan in the early 16th century, they learned how drinking milk was like drinking blood, and eating beef was unthinkable. Even the revered Lord Toyotomi Hideyoshi was supposedly questioning Portuguese missionaries on their practices of eating beef, as cows were so useful as farm animals. Still, Portuguese were able to spread some of their cuisine to locals, including sweets, tempura, and beef. Dietary customs began to change faster in the late 19th century. After Emperor Meiji assumed power in 1868, the Japanese government moved to end their 2 centuries of isolation. In the end, the wishes of the emperor prevailed. As Japan opened up to the world, it began to absorb meat-based dishes from Korea, China, and the West. Hey, so why does South Africa have bear avoidance laws? I have to ask because sure, this may be reasonable in North America, but bears are not native to the African continent, and not one single bear has walked the lands of the sub-Sahara region for more than 1 million years. Yet a long-standing legislation bans tourists and locals from interacting with bears in South Africa. Bear wrestling is illegal, and you cannot participate, organize, or view this activity. They're not allowed on public or private beaches, so don't try that, and you can't bring them out in public with you. You can legally own a domestic bear, however, which nobody does, because where the hell are you gonna find a bear in South Africa? Alright, how about some snip first and authority later? The 10 kingdoms of the 5 dynasties were in a state of war. Famine came in waves across China, corruption runs rampant, and a very strange law was introduced in the southern Han dynasty. In order to maintain the stability of the regime, Lord Liu Qi proposed that all officials should have their boys removed first and be authorized later. The justification for why a eunuch could be trusted as a high-rank official more than a man who who hadn't had his manhood tampered with, is that since they were incapable of having children, they wouldn't be tempted to seize the power of the emperor and start their own dynasty. In many cases, eunuchs were considered more reliable than the scholar officials. Also, the belief and actual fact that minimized level of testosterone allowed them to focus their upstairs brain on more scholarly and noble efforts rather than a tantalizing distraction of women. And while discussing Chinese laws, remember to ask, what's your last name? During the Western Zhou dynasty, a legal system was still in its infancy. At that time, it became stipulated in their laws that there could be no marriage with the same surname, meaning you and your boo's last name both happen to be Niles. You don't get to be Mr. and Mrs. Niles, you get to be Mr. and Mrs. Nullified. See, I set it up just to say that. Anyways, you catch my drift, and people with the same last name could not intermarry. Why? Well, probably the main obvious reason that jumped to your brain, and the reason I say this ancient law would have defied ancient logic. The Zhou dynasty literally figured out the one thing that the Spanish, Danish, British, Egyptian, all these empires and more couldn't. That marriage between close relatives as well as marriages between men and women of the same surname, usually from single families, kept resulting in deformities, illness, and sterility, not keeping a royal bloodline pure. I know. So they slapped on a no cousin law as well as scrutinized last names, and royal families had to keep room for Jesus. This prohibition lasted for thousands of years. The tradition is still upheld in some areas today. On a fun note, some other ancient Chinese love taboos included marrying a widow of a deceased brother, marrying a fiance of an elder brother, and marrying a female who had previously been in an elopement. All such marriages should bring disgrace to the family and be nullified. Let's learn about how this word came from a law: ostracized. To be ostracized is to be exiled or excluded from a group who all have a crap-talking sesh and decide you can't hang out with them anymore, Big Brother style. Like a lot of our words, it comes from a Greek word, specifically ostraka, which refers to a shard of pottery. But what does a broken piece of pottery have to do with being exiled by a bunch of people? Well, imagine you are a VIP in Athens. Sky is clear, God picks you off like flies, wasps are dying in figs, life is good. But you're a bit of a renegade. You think maybe people should ask for consent, you take a bath twice a day and don't want to rub poop in your wounds. If all that rebelness meant you proved to be too much of a thorn in the side of the powers that be, they'd get together and have that Big Brother style vote to decide whether to get rid of you or not. But instead of going backstage to cast their votes, they'd all write your names down on a piece of busted pottery, toss them in a bin, shake them around, and count them. If you had enough pieces of pottery with your name on it, you got exiled from Athens, aka ostracized, for a whole 10 years. Make up enough rumors about someone, rig the ostraka, and boom, you got a manipulative way to kick someone out of town. These ostraka you are seeing on screen are from 482 BC. They are found in a well near the Acropolis. The name on them is Themistocles, who after he was ostracized defected to Persia, where he was made governor of Magnesia. Maybe where the milk of comes from. I don't know. Thank you and never come again was the mindset of the Sakuku Edict, a country of approximately 22 million people thrown in a 200-year isolation. What sounds like a far-flung movie plot was Japan between the 17th and 19th centuries. This came about in 1635 when the Japanese government enacted the Sakoku Edict in an attempt to eliminate foreign influences. The Warring States era and their rulers had been stretched thin by said foreigners. Oda Nobunaga was fascinated by Europe, and it brought Japan new commodities like clocks, glasses, weapons, and they brought something much more insidious: Christianity. The emperor understood that the religion had a way of binding people together. If he could use Christianity the way that his rivals had used Buddhism, maybe he could rise to the top. By 1582, Oda was so close, but he's betrayed by his deputy. His failing had been letting too much of the Christianity into the country, and people resented him. This is where the second influential Japanese leader, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, comes in. He had a growing concern about the Christian missionaries in Japan as well as the wider influence of Europe. It was justified, as in 1587 Christian lords are caught selling Japanese to Europeans. Upon this discovery, Hideyoshi ordered all the Christian missionaries to leave the country. Since the Japanese were still conducting business with foreign merchants, the ban wasn't fully upheld, allowing the missionaries to re-enter under a different guise until 1596. Word spread globally that the Spanish government was in fact using Christian missionaries to win territories around the world. In a fit of rage, Toyotomi ordered the beheadings of 40 missionaries and said nobody is going in or effing out of this country. Tokugawa Ieyasu, who took over after Hideyoshi, his grandson passes the infamous Saikoku Edict, also known as the Shogunate, in 1633 out of fear for the devastation of the spread of plague, smallpox from Europeans, and Christian religion and what it would cause from those still sneaking in. Japan would henceforth exist in splendid isolation, and our customs, social order, and way of life would be protected from foreign influence. The only thing that actually defies logic in this law was, prior to the shogunate, Japan engaged in trade with Korea, China, and Europe, utilizing products the other countries had to offer. However, the edict was passed and the Netherlands was the only country allowed admission when it closed to the rest of the world. So it was a trade's chokehold. The Saikoku Edict came to an abrupt end in 1852 when the US Navy essentially and quite literally forced Japan to reopen its market. Now for the universal law of sieging. This unspoken but very well-known law of the land is one we even know of today. During the medieval period, if you surrender without a fight, you will be spared. If you're starved out, expect to be treated worse but not unreasonable. If you fight, you should expect to have your settlement looted or worse, burned to the ground. This wasn't set in stone like the Geneva Convention, but it was understood and silently agreed upon from a tactical point of view. If you want to get as many settlements as possible, you don't go around destroying them to get the people out. You destroy and kill what you're after in the first place, which is land and control. So it makes sense why this was around. The Mongols, however, took this universal law a bit further and said if you kill their envoys or don't surrender without a fight, your settlement will not only be looted but systematically exterminated. Not that different from Europe, but still think about it a little more. If your settlement offers resistance or some idiot decided to kill a Mongol envoy against your wishes, everyone could be slaughtered. The village idiot who's too inebriated to read the room and realize, hey, we're getting invaded right now, could just think he's funny and push one of these Mongols. Everyone's getting killed, no exception. Brits and Spaniards weren't to that caliber and we all know it. It's one of those things you can understand, but it's still unimaginably evil at the same time. And finally, the wildest one on the list. You can't hire a white lady. Oh, Canada. Another reminder of the dark past our government has. The second it became legal for white women to work here, the government dropped a law that it was illegal for a Chinese man to hire a white woman. An act to prevent the employment of female labor in certain capacities was born in 1912, and the anti-Chinese law was brought up in a widely publicized trial after two Chinese men tried to employ three white women. Ku Wong Wing and Ku Wong Sing were charged with violating this law. And what does that law say? Why, direct your attention towards screen where you yourself can see the bull in writing. Yeah, anyways. So, May 1912, Ku Wong Wing and Ku Wong Sing, men who operated two restaurants and a rooming house in Moose Jaw's small but growing Chinatown, were charged with violating the new law. Between them, they employed three white women, Nellie Lane, Mabel Hoffman, and Annie Hartman. Wing appealed, arguing the law was outside of the power of the province as laws related to morality were considered criminal matters, which is the exclusive authority of the federal government. Pop off Wing. With the help of the local Chinese community, they challenged their conviction in the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal and subsequently at the Supreme Court of Canada. They lost both times. The legislation remained in effect until 1969, although it wasn't enforced in the last few years. Apparently, as said in the literal court case, in terms, the section purports merely to regulate places of business and resorts owned and managed by Chinese, independent of nationality, in the interest and morals of women and girls in Saskatchewan. Alright, thank you so much for tuning in and I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more Bumblebee content. And until next time, comment down below what ancient lands you think had the wildest of ancient laws.